Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. Now, Pakistan has been faced with economic difficulties, but the government remains committed, first of all, to complete the IMF program and also to stabilize the country's economy. And the government had to take and implement some tough decisions in that regard, which include the Finance Supplementary Bill 2023 and the approval of the increase in gas and electricity prices also. The government had already removed the cap as far as the exchange rate is concerned. And we have seen there were lengthy discussions with the IMF delegation during the 9th review of the extended fund facility of the IMF bailout program. But despite all these tough measures which have been taken by the government, the staff level agreement remains pending. There is a delay. That means that the release of $1.1 billion tranche remains pending regarding that, which is badly required for Pakistan and to stabilize the country's economy. At the same time, we have seen Finance Minister Aqdas has said that Federal Board of Revenue has achieved its revenue target for the month of February 2023, registering 17% growth as compared to the same period of the last year. At the same time, we have seen Finance Minister Aqdas has also held a virtual meeting with the U.S. Deputy Secretary of Treasury and apprised him about the talks with the IMF delegation during the 9th review. The U.S. official at the same time expressed the confidence in the policies and the programs of the current government for the financial and economic stability. In today's program, we are going to try to understand what are the core reasons for this delay of the staff level agreement between Pakistan and the IMF, and what is required more to be done in that direction. And since we have seen there has been interaction by Finance Minister and the U.S. Deputy Secretary of Treasury, how the U.S. can help Pakistan in this regard, and why is the IMF not showing any sort of flexibility regarding the release of this tranche of $1.1 billion as far as the extended fund facility to Pakistan is concerned. For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Dr. Manzoor Ahmad. He's Trade Arbitrator, World Trade Organization. Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. And at the same time, in the studio, we're honored to have been joined by Dr. Shimail Daud, his former president, Rawalpindi Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Dr. Daud, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. And on Skype, we are being joined by senior economist, Dr. Aqdas Afzal. Dr. Afzal, thank you very much for your time, also being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, let me begin with this particular achievement of the Federal Board of Revenue. As Finance Minister has said that the FBR has achieved the revenue target for February 2023 by collecting $527.2 billion, registering a growth of 17% for the same period as compared to this period of the last year. So how big a success for Federal Board of Revenue do you consider this one is?
Well, it is commendable that they achieved this 17%, but the problem is, if your inflation rate is much higher than that, and your devaluation, your rupee is falling more, so maybe the expectation is that you would do even better, because 17%, okay, a normal routine of things because of inflation, etc., should come. Unfortunately, there's another side to it, because Pakistan depends so much on taxes on imports, and imports are being restricted. So there's that problem as well. So FBR is doing well, but then there are all these other problems.
Right, Dr. Daud, how heartening do you see this particular development?
I think building upon what Dr. Saab is saying, it is still a positive sign. And why? Because he's rightly pointed out, because we've seen, because of the restrictive actions taken by the government to curtail the balance of payment issue and the trade deficit and to narrow it down, despite, because most of the taxation we see is collected at the import level. So despite that reduction, which we've already seen in results, despite that, having such targets means that it's good performance. Having said that, still the challenge remains that now because of the situation where we are at, we'll have to outperform our targets in order to continuously have a positive outcome.
So there is a revised target of 7,640 billion rupees, despite the economic challenges, especially which were exacerbated by the devastating floods of 2022. So do you think after this particular target has been achieved for this particular month, this particular revised target is very much achievable also?
Well, now it is not, it's actually of utmost importance because one, the CPI is higher. It was already 26 to 27%. We are going towards even a higher rate, unfortunately. At the same time, we are also hearing about the discussions and one of the requirements from the IMF team for maybe revising the and further tightening of the monetary policy. So that further will have an impact. So definitely, I think this revised target will be welcome, and we hope that the FBR will perform as it has in the past.
Right, Dr. Afzal, what's your take regarding this? How do you see this particular development of FBR achieving the revenue target for this particular month, which has registered a 17% growth as compared to the same period of the last year?
Again, another dot ball.
Dr. Afzal, can you hear me, please? Okay, I think we've got a little bit of technical issue and we'll try to sort that one out. Dr. Manzoor, Ahmad, now we have seen the government was determined to complete this IMF program. We have seen the IMF delegation coming to Pakistan, although it was already delayed, which was due in October. But there were lengthy discussions, and during that we saw the Prime Minister himself saying the IMF delegation was giving a very tough time. But the things which were agreed in those lengthy discussions, the tough measures, they've been decided and implemented by the government. So what reasons do you associate why there hasn't been the staff level agreement so far?
I must say the previous delay was mostly due to our fault. I should accept that, because IMF from the very beginning, when this was signed, this agreement was signed in 2019, the agreement was that we let exchange rate be determined by market forces. And after the change of finance minister, the new finance minister wanted it, they thought it should be much less. That's what he thought, but didn't leave it to the market.
He considered its actual value around 190, which actually happens to be around 190. And what he opined at that time was it was because of the speculators. Yes,
but there are market forces. Had it been just speculators, it would have come, but it never came. There's a market, this thing. So it came wherever, it stabilized there, 265, whatever it is, 267. That was one thing. The other thing was that IMF was worried about our energy losses, in general, circular debt, etc. And one of the first things we do is give another 100 billion subsidy to Aptima or whatever. And I think IMF was not too happy that, here we are asking you for exchange rate and reduction of subsidies, but there the government, is going in the opposite direction. So I think
I'll take your view regarding this particular exchange rate. There was a cap which was later on removed by the government also. Yes. So there was also a precondition by the IMF before the delegation level talks for the 9th review also. Dr. Afzal is back with us online. Dr. Afzal, how do you see this particular development of FBR achieving its target for February 2023, which registers 17% growth as compared to the same period of the last year?
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for having me on the show. First of all, I would like to say that I would like to echo what Dr. Manzoor mentioned just now, that even though the increase in prices is almost 32% now, so the latest numbers that have just come out for inflation year on year is 32%. So what that does is that what's really going on is that your prices are increasing by 32%. So your revenues should also go up by at least 32% if the same relativities have to be maintained. So in this case, what we have seen is that revenues have gone up by 17%. So I personally think where this performance is commendable, because we all understand that the FPR is operating in a very tough environment. You know, the country is going through some very volatile political, social, and climate crises. But I think there is still room for improvement when it comes to revenue collection, when it comes to the FPR. So, like I said, I would like to just agree with what Dr. Manzoor said in his analysis.
So there was a revised target of $7,640 billion rupees rather for this fiscal year. Do you think it's achievable with the rising prices? You said there is of course an impact on this particular revenue target also. So if this particular increase in prices continues, do you think this particular target would be achievable?
Yes, I think so. I think this target should be achievable given the kind of inflation that we are facing, and despite the import compression that is going on.
So this was one of the preconditions of the IMF for the resumption of for the 9th review of the extended fund facility. So don't you think the kind of tough measures which were agreed during the 9th review, lengthy discussions with the IMF delegation that was here in Pakistan, and now the certain measures which have been implemented by the government, the IMF should really consider and show some sort of flexibility in order to release that tranche of $1.1 billion?
Absolutely. I think I don't understand what is bringing about this delay. I mean, I have a theory as to what is bringing about this delay, and I'm going to share that with you. But I think we need to understand the context in which the Pakistani economy is operating. Look, we are facing the worst floods that this country has ever faced in the last 75 years. That has pushed upwards of 20 million people, additional 20 million people, below the poverty line. There is no economic growth in Pakistan. So I, for starters, did not understand this insistence by the IMF that Pakistan should somehow cough up a primary fiscal surplus. My understanding was that the IMF was going to be very charitable and very understanding of the situation that Pakistan was facing. But look, somehow the Pakistani government and the IMF were able to agree on certain fundamentals. And it seems to me that Pakistan has held its end of the bargain. So this delay from the IMF, what the government is now referring to as shifting goalposts, is very concerning. And I think there is something else going on in the background. And if you allow me, I can share my theory with you as to what is going on.
Please go ahead.
I think we have to understand how the IMF is operating in the wider context of this burgeoning rivalry between two great powers, that is the US and China. And I think this particular institution, I mean, people have definitely argued that this institution serves as an extension of US foreign policy. So I think where I'm not saying this, what I'm saying is that there seems to be a conscious effort on part of this particular institution to force China to show a lot of generosity to Pakistan. So I think this is not simply about Pakistan and IMF. I think this is about this background rivalry that is going on between the US and China. And now the IMF is trying its level best to force China to give more money to Pakistan.
Dr.
I think this is exactly
your point is well taken. I'll come and resume the discussion with you right from this particular point. A very important and significant thing that you've just highlighted. So it has got a political dimension to it as well. Now, Dr. Manzoor, when we talk about the other dimensions, what makes the IMF delay despite the government implementing, as we were discussing already, the government also removed that particular cap as far as the exchange rate is concerned. That was also a precondition by the IMF before the 9th review discussions. So why not a flexibility on the part of IMF?
I agree with Dr. Aqdas, Afzal, that it's unfortunate that after this floods, the situation, you know, Pakistan having lost almost 30 billion, 15 billion losses and 15 billion for recovery, and this is a very different time, and so there should be more considerations, not the normal time, and they're not doing that. On the other hand, maybe they have a feeling that, for example, whatever the commitments of Pakistan, that okay, if we get so much from IMF, this is what is the alternate we will get from our friendly countries or something. And they are perhaps not sure or something. That's why they are asking more and more. Why don't you get us some return or something? So perhaps that is the problem. But these things are a little bit secret as well. You know, these things that don't come out. But there is, you're right, that there's always some little political angle.
So, Dr. Daud, what major road barriers do you think are associated with this delay?
Well, I think in addition to this, there's a difference of opinion in approach in some figures between the government's negotiating team and the IMF. It is about the, for example, the figure between 5 and 7 billion in terms of the deficit that needs to be filled. Similarly, the permanent, they want us to put a permanent tariff which is added into the electric bill, electricity, and so forth and so on. So these are the sort of differences where the negotiating team is disagreeing from the government side, and I think those could be some surface level disagreements, which I'm hoping that will be ironed out. But yes, there definitely is a political shadow behind this. Having said that, since we have not been forthcoming in our commitments in the past, that definitely gives an excuse to the negotiating team that they want to make it a tight contract this time in this review, and they want to make sure that we deliver.
But that was previously. Now the current government has already implemented.
Yeah, so they are taking those measures, but they are ensuring that whatever disagreements are at the end, at the tail end, are also ironed out, and then we do those. But already I totally agree that the government has taken very strong measures and difficult measures where they're losing out politically as well in terms of their image, but even then they have taken those hard decisions. Having said that, all the other bilaterals and all the friendly countries are also looking towards this SLA, and hopefully that those funds will help us soar through June and beyond.
I'll come to that point. Dr. Daud, you already mentioned that there is a difference of opinion regarding the projections, regarding the external financing gap and the current annual current account deficit. Why is there a difference of projections between what the Pakistani authorities have done and what the IMF has done?
Well, it could. I cannot really put together exactly the details on how the differences are being calculated. However, for example, the team is saying that the minimum debt requirement for our state bank could be reduced by $1 billion. Similarly, other calculations would shave off another $1 billion from there. So these are the sorts of discussions that are going on. And obviously, some of the measures, as rightly pointed out, the strong measures in terms of the basis points of increase by the tightening of the monetary policy is already on the table. So we are expecting that maybe between 200 and 250 basis points. So that would be another prior action taken by the government. So I think once these decisions are finalized, maybe in the next week or so, we hope this will come through, and the friendly rollover support, and also from Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. China is already in the process of supporting in terms of the commercial banks, and we're hoping that the rollover by the Chinese funds, which are expected to be rolled over. So all of this cumulatively will help us overcome our immediate needs in terms of the deficit.
Right, Dr. Aqdas Afzal, why do you think there happens to be a difference of projections when it comes to the annual current account deficit and the external financing gap, the difference of those projections, and how this particular issue can be resolved between Pakistani authorities and the IMF?
Well, I think when they talk about differences in projections, I think there may be a difference in projections, but that difference is not that steep or that high that IMF should not come out with a staff level agreement with Pakistan. I think at this point, it is, it is high time that if the IMF is going to help Pakistan, they need to come up with a staff level agreement. They need to cough up that tranche that Pakistan has been waiting for, because we have done everything that we said we were going to do. which includes increasing our interest rate, that includes increasing our electricity and gas prices, that includes a mini budget of 170 billion rupees. And mind you, I see a very, very stark contradiction and inconsistency in what the IMF is saying, what it is preaching, and what it is doing. For instance, the managing director of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, just a few days ago said that we want to protect the people of Pakistan, primarily the poor people of Pakistan. But the taxes that the IMF is forcing this government to implement in Pakistan, they are all going to be extremely regressive. They are going to target the poor people of this country. So I think there is a very, very big contradiction in between what the IMF is preaching and what it is doing, number one.
So, Dr. Afzal, I'll seek your pardon over here. I'll stop you over here. So, in that sort of a scenario, what the IMF is preaching and what it is actually warning the Pakistani authorities to do, so what options do you think remain at the hand of the Pakistani authorities to deal with that sort of a scenario?
I think we have very, very few and limited options at this point. And this is exactly why we are being treated in a somewhat cavalier manner by the IMF. I think we are a country of 230 million people. We are the fifth largest country in the world in terms of population. And to get this kind of a treatment when the IMF mission walks away from Pakistan without giving us a staff level agreement, I think this is verging on unprofessional conduct by the IMF team. And I'm going to just say this here. I think it is high time that we get the staff level agreement. And whatever the problem there is between the US and China, that needs to be settled without using Pakistan as a battleground. Because this economy cannot suffer any more delay. So we need that tranche, and we need it today. And I really hope that somebody at the IMF is listening to what I'm saying, because this delay is really not helping Pakistani people.
Right. You already brought a very significant issue over here that happens to be having a political dimension to it. You already said that there are certain other reasons behind this particular delay, primarily because of the US and China rivalry. Now, when we talk about Chinese help towards Pakistan, it's already dispersed $700 million and 1.3 billion Chinese loan is also expected in 3 tranches. So what else the US expects China to do, and what do they want China to do in that regard?
Look, there is a battle of nerves going on between the IMF and China all over the world. We see the same situation in the case of Zambia. We see the same situation in the case of Sri Lanka. The IMF trying to force China to cough up more and more and more money to emerging economies like Pakistan. I think this delay could very well be another link in that same chain. So whatever China is going to give Pakistan has to be broken up, or it has to be not connected to the kind of assistance that is going to come to us from the IMF. And I think, like I said, just a few moments ago, the situation is very dire in Pakistan. And this economy is already facing highest inflation ever in the history of this nation. There is no economic growth. 20 to 30 million people have been pushed into poverty. We don't want to go in a situation where Pakistan's street is up in chaos and social unrest. So
right,
I think
Dr.
whoever is listening to me at the IMF needs to act now and act fast.
Right, Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, your take regarding this. Already China has been helping Pakistan out. We have seen the disbursement of $700 million, 1.3 more are expected. If we go by what Dr. Afzal has tried to establish over here, what else how the US wants China to operate in this regard towards Pakistan?
Well, I agree what Dr. Aqdas said and what Dr. Shimail said. You see, it's putting more and more pressure because there's this rivalry between US and China, and Pakistan still is very close to China. So, there's putting more pressure. But I think they, you know, the point about interest rate, I mean, that has been, they've been pressing us to, because they think that our inflation is not coming down. It's been moving up. So they say that the only way you can control inflation is by increasing at least, you know, 2% at 200 basis point or something like that. And I think the government has been resisting it because there's, as Dr. Afzal said, I mean, there's no growth. There's, you know, there's so many people more going into poverty. So the government feels very helpless, but I think they want some more cut in our expenditure. They are not coming out clearly, but that's how it is. They feel that there are sectors which we can reduce, and we are not doing it.
Right, Dr. Manzoor, there was already a report by the Human Rights Watch. It insisted and urged the IMF that it should provide Pakistan the time and flexibility to achieve a sustainable, inclusive and rights-based recovery. Now, given that particular urgency and the kind of humanitarian crisis Pakistan had to face in the wake of the devastating floods 2022, the facts Dr. Aqdas Afzal has also alluded to. Now, don't you think this particular economic crisis in Pakistan should be seen with a humanitarian lens when it comes to IMF?
It should be. That's how it should be. But U.S. has normally, historically, has been resistant to accede to Human Rights Watch, and because they come out quite strongly on U.S. and so they tend to ignore it. Yeah.
So what options do you think remain
I mean,
at the hands
there are
of
very
Pakistani
few
authorities?
options. In fact, if we look at it, every time we thought there would be another option, and eventually we wasted some time and then had to go back to IMF. So what I feel is that, you know, they should have whatever, because they know it that 2 months down the line, 3 months down the line, now the situation is very bad because we don't have even 1 month, you know, it's a few weeks, this thing. And so today is this downgrading by Moody's was it? Yeah. The default is imminent, and it's very little chance that, you know, it will be avoided. So that makes it much worse. So whatever little things, we have to get going. And
so Moody's at the same time has also raised concern. So there is also a sort of call for urgency as far as the IMF dealing with Pakistan is concerned. It also categorically says that the government is trying to implement the programs and the policies in order to achieve that economic and financial stability. So when Human Rights Watch is saying that, and similar sort of comment coming from Moody's also, so how should the IMF be dealt with right now?
No, Moody's, in fact, is going there. Sorry, you understand?
No, please go
okay,
ahead.
Moody's, this thing would have put IMF further on that if Pakistan default is imminent, why put some money into it? You see, that's how it is. So Pakistan has to, for example, this interest rate. I feel that, you know, if personally I'm not an economist, but maybe Shimail and Dr. Aqdas, that, you know, this increasing of 2%, perhaps they could go ahead with it.
Moody's, while it downgraded Pakistan's rating, said that the government is implementing some tax measures to meet the conditions of the International Monetary Fund program, and a disbursement by the IMF may help to cover the country's immediate needs. So what I understand from this statement is very similar sort of a call that was already done by Human Rights Watch also. No?
Yes, but you see, IMF is basically its member countries. So if there was any pressure from any of the major countries, like for example, our finance minister tried to speak to the US because they have the major votes and things like that, perhaps that might work. But human rights, etc., might have good overall, what should I say, you know, some sympathy for Pakistan, but it doesn't create anything more than sympathy. It doesn't really create any pressure.
It's not only Human Rights Watch.
Like US would have done, or you know, any of the major economies.
It was the United Nations Secretary General himself who visited Pakistan, had the first-hand experience of the kind of the proportion and the scale of the devastation in the wake of the floods in 2022. Dr. Shimail Daud, what's your take regarding that?
Well,
what are the options?
The thing is that we have put ourselves in this corner. And now we are all focused on what the other party is going to do, because that is the only direction we're looking at. So we don't have a choice. We have to exactly agree what they want, period. Number one. Number two, what we can do, as you've asked this question, you raised this question, if I were to make that decision, I think we should shut down different parts of the economy instead of it being shut down later. Why don't we shut it right now and safeguard the resources instead of waiting it to be shut down? So that makes sense, number one. Number two, restructuring with the Chinese debt, which is 1/3 of our debt, and then restructuring with the Paris Club. Obviously that's going to take time, but the short-term measure is obviously we have to look in the eye and do exactly as they want and get it over with and move forward. And then always,
no matter how much it burdens the common man.
no matter, because right now you are stuck. You just cannot pass this.
With the kind of statement IMF chief Kristalina Georgieva as
hear me out.
Please.
You have to get over this line where we're stuck. Once you pass this, then you start doing the fixing. What happens is whenever we pass this emergency, then again we waste the time, we waste the resources. Then we start giving the subsidies, as Dr. Saab mentioned earlier. We start going, and what do? If today we get all the debt that we need, how are we going to spend it? If our elite is going to spend it on unnecessary, non-essentials, which should not be spent, then how are we ever going to stand on our feet? So until and unless we have a plan, and that's exactly what they're asking for. They're asking for a plan. And our side needs to sit together and need to shut bits and pieces instead of them shutting us down, so that we move forward. This is how I look at it.
Right, Dr. Aqdas Afzal, we've seen through various media reports that the government authorities remain very hopeful when it comes to the support which would be extended by the friendly countries, especially when we talk about the Gulf countries. There is an estimate that $2 billion would be disbursed from Saudi Arabia, $1 billion from the UAE, and $2 billion from the sale of assets to these nations. So do we expect and should we be hopeful regarding the disbursement of these funds, as the government happens to be very much hopeful that around $7 billion by June would be in our foreign exchange reserves?
We should always be hopeful. We should always be optimistic, because anybody who has ever bet against Pakistan in the last 75 years has lost. So I think Pakistan is going to come out of this impasse. The IMF is going to give us a staff level agreement, and Pakistan is going to stabilize its economy. And in the years to come, economic growth is going to pick up. And I just like to say that I think no matter what the IMF is telling Pakistan, Pakistani government, no matter this government or any other government, should never ever make any policy at the expense of the poor people of this country. I think they should always come first. Pakistan should always protect its vulnerable classes. And I think even in this situation, I find it contradictory that where on the one hand, the IMF managing director is saying that Pakistan's poor people have to be protected, whereas on the other hand, they are forcing this government to implement all these regressive taxes on Pakistan, and now they are delaying the disbursement of the tranche that we are so dependent on, because in the background there is some crazy politics going on between two great powers of this world.
So Dr. Shimail Daud happens to be having a different opinion from you, Dr. Aqdas Afzal. He said at this particular point in history, we need to do whatever the IMF asks us to do, no matter how much it burdens the common man at the same time.
Exactly.
No, I don't agree respectfully with what has been said. I think Pakistan must protect the most vulnerable sections of society. This is our responsibility. This is why we live in society. This is why we are a nation. And whatever we do, we must protect the vulnerable sections of Pakistan. If that requires implementing taxes on the elite, we have to do that.
Right. So there seems to be a very narrow corridor for the incumbent government when it comes to dealing with the IMF, getting the staff level agreement, getting that $1.1 billion tranche released, and also not making the already vulnerable segments of the society even more vulnerable. So what to do now?
Well, nobody said that governance was going to be easy. That's for starters. So yes, there is a very narrow path that has to be navigated with all the skill and acumen that our political leadership can display at this very, very critical juncture. And I think one more thing that I would like to say here, I think in the future, in negotiations with organizations with like the IMF or the US, I think one gap that I have seen in the present negotiations is the absence of the foreign affairs or foreign policy team. So I think if they had brought in people like the foreign minister, Hina Rabbani Khar, and even Shari Rahman, I think Pakistan would have been able to generate a lot of um, moral pressure on institutions like the IMF, which would have tipped the scales in Pakistan's favor in this situation.
Dr. Shimail, Dr.
Yeah.
Aqdas Afzal differs from what you already said, that no matter how many.
Can I
Please go ahead.
characterize what Dr. Aqdas said? What I'm trying to say is not that we have to implement regressive taxes or we have to do that. What that means is we have to fix our house. And what that means is we have to cut where we are losing our resources, and that means we have to shut down. So we might have to shut down, we're paying people for last maybe 10 years or more where there's no production, there's nothing, there's no outcome. So I mean things like that. So it's common sense. So we need to shave off from here and there and increase our fiscal space. So these are the sorts of drastic measures we need to do. What I'm saying is, why wait for the situation to present itself where those drastic measures are eventually an outcome? Why don't we take them now? This is the only way where we can create some fiscal space other than negotiating as much as we can. However, we know that leverage, we've not been able to take that leverage. The finance minister had tried the level best. We've tried with our friendly countries and so forth and so on. So we cannot pass more subsidy to our masses. So we're stuck. And in this situation, we have to create some space and then go for restructuring of our existing debt.
Right, Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, your take regarding that very narrow path for the government in order to deal with the IMF at the same time not burdening the already vulnerable segments of the society.
Yeah, I just hope that Dr. Afzal is right, that perhaps we'll come out of it. But the prudent thing is what Dr. Shimail Daud is saying, that we have to be ready. And there's we have come to an impasse and we have to pass it and then look at what we next. For example, even our very friendly Saudi Arabia, which would normally offer, and they said it's tied to that. You have to do this and then only this. And the point, the point Dr. Aqdas mentioned about foreign affairs, I agree with him, they should be involved. But then, I don't know whether I should say it or not, just the other day there was a vote in the UN on this Ukraine thing, and Pakistan didn't go. So the foreign office also would be in a bind. We are in a very difficult situation.
So we have seen there was an interaction by the finance minister Aqdas with the US Deputy Secretary for Treasury, and he has expressed his confidence in the policies and the programs of the government for economic and financial stability. I'll take Dr. Afzal's view on this particular thing. Is also Dr. Afzal has extended his support and cooperation for sustainable economic development in Pakistan. So if we look at this from a political dimension, so there is a categorical expression of support from the US side. So is there any expectation that the US could do something in this regard, at least for this particular tranche to be released?
Well, the US can definitely put pressure on the IMF when it comes to releasing this tranche, but let me give you some numbers. In the last 1 year alone, the US has provided $112 billion as aid to Ukraine. Let me repeat that. $112 billion as aid to Ukraine. So there is no dearth of money. It is all about political or geopolitical priorities. And I think it should not be about geopolitical priorities.
Right. Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, you want to add something to it? There is an expression of support by the US Deputy Secretary for
I
Treasury.
can see what Dr. Aqdas is saying, but their US sees its direct interest. It doesn't see the same thing in Pakistan. At one time, it used to, and it would come in, you know, whatever, I mean, whenever there was Afghan war or something, they would come in. But at this time, they don't see the same urgency to help Pakistan out as they used to. That's what I feel.
So there is one view where what should be, and there is one view what is. And what we are trying to say is that we have looked for long what should be as a country. Now we should start looking at what is, and we should start doing what we should be doing, which all the countries are asking us to do.
But this particular argument, $112 billion in aid to
I totally
Ukraine,
agree.
so that there is no comparison
their
to
money.
what the amount is required for Pakistan at this
It's their
time
money.
to sail through that economic sort of crisis, and the kind of amount that is being diverted
Well, the
to
world
Ukraine.
is not a just place. So that's how it is. We need to work, we need to look at our house, we need to set our priorities in order, we need to cut our losses, improve our fiscal space, do our homework, get our things in order.
Dr. Shimail Daud, former president of the Rawalpindi Chamber of Commerce and Industry, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, a trade arbitrator, World Trade Organization, thank you very much for your time also. And on Skype, we were joined by Dr. Aqdas Afzal, senior economist. Thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. And with that, we come to the end of today's show. Until the next one, take good care of yourselves.